this is something I can do that is creatively fulfilling.
Like, you can just tell me you listen to a small part of it and I'll be okay.
And you can put on your headphones and listen to a podcast and listen to grown-ups in your ears.
Do it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast.
All right, everybody, welcome. I am here today with Elsie, who is it's fair to say, a podcast legend at this point, or certainly a podcast OG. But I can see that there was maybe some offense taken by that title. So, Elsie, before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself? I'm not going to do my favorite joke. This person needs no introduction, so we won't.
Right.
Who are you? How did you get here? Where have we been? Where are we going?
Oh my God.
And if so, 2 minutes to promote whatever you want to promote, so people know to skip 2 minutes forward and ignore all the advertising.
Oh my God. Yes. So my name is Elsie Escobar. I am currently the Director of Community and Content over at Libsyn. I'm also what I call myself a podcasting advocate, and I am a podcasting mentor, primarily centering underrepresented voices, undersourced voices in podcasting. And I've been in the industry since 2006. So I started doing a yoga podcast back in the day. So innovative to teach a visual class with your mouth. And from then on, I just dove into the industry. I've also been inducted into the Podcasting Hall of Fame, which was a fantastic thing that happened in 2017. And goodness gracious, almost, I guess, 20 years into an industry. That's a lot of time to be doing the same thing, I think.
It is. Tell me about it. You're 22 of running CacheFly, so I'm feeling however you feel. That's also how I feel.
Oh my God. Yeah, I know. It's such a long time. Like before, it seemed like, oh, podcasting hasn't been around for so long. Oh, and now it's pretty not that. We've been out there.
It's like being an FM radio station in the 80s. It's like, actually, this has been going on for a little while now.
Actually, this exists.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'd love to dive in just on what you said there, because I'd love to learn more. So what does being a podcast advocate look like? And let's start with there. And then I'd love to get into the underrepresentation as well.
Yeah, so it's not even a podcast advocate, it's a podcasting advocate. And I see that in the sense that we always have to talk about podcasting. Meaning podcasting, what it is, not necessarily my shows or my podcast, but that I feel as podcasters, we tend to take for granted that everybody knows what this thing is. And thus, we need to get better at sharing what a podcast is, understanding what podcasting as a whole is, and then telling our people about it. That's from the podcaster side of things. And the other side of things, it's also, I feel, a responsibility of all of us, and I do this as much as I can in either in real life, online, or however, to talk about podcasting, to talk about how amazing podcasting is, what it can be used for, what are the benefits for people, not necessarily to talk to our own folks, of course, but to reach a larger audience. Because even though we've been around 20 years now, there's still either a misunderstanding or a direct resistance to somebody saying, you should listen to that as a podcast. And they go, oh, I don't like podcasting. Oh, okay. Why? Oh, because, and then they give you some really random answer where you're like, well, that's not podcasting. I don't know what, right?
Yeah.
So
what do you attribute the random answers to? Is it like technophobia? Is it some sort of resistance to the abundance of choice? Like, what is it that you think forget what people say.
Right.
What really is at the core of that, do you think?
I feel that it's one of those things where you label a genre, not a genre, like a mechanism for consumption of media through one piece of work.
Sure.
Right? And so it would be as if you asked somebody, you know what, movies are great. And they would go, well, I really don't like those Avengers. And you're like, wait, but there's many movies.
Sure.
Some of them are not that. Some of them are
Right.
not action adventure. Did you know that? There's like romance movies and action adventure, all of those things. And that's what I feel a lot of the time. People have an understanding of what a podcast is based on one thing.
Right.
And they don't, and there's many times, especially now, where the understanding of what a podcast is what they see on TV and or on YouTube, which is usually a set with two people, chairs, microphones.
Yep.
Oh, that's a podcast. And they don't understand that there is quite another level B
Sure.
and the type of service that they could bring to your life.
Right. Now, is that I would have to, as two people not on a two-person set, but a
Right.
virtual two-person set, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I feel like this is what a lot that actually is.
Yes, yes.
Is there, like, one of the comparisons Paul Culligan made was always like, that podcast competition is drive time radio. But when we talked about it, I was like, okay, I saw it from a technology standpoint, right? Like, my mom today, and some of it's just generation, but my mom would call me to tell me, good news, I've successfully downloaded a podcast and listened to it. She would not call me and say, good news, I tuned in to Drive Time Radio today in my car. Aren't I an advanced, technical person? So, like, on one hand, I feel like there's just some level of technology challenge there. But on the flip side, with what you just said, and I don't know this answer, so I'm going to throw you on the spot a little bit.
Mhm.
Is there anybody producing podcasts today that sound like Drive Time Radio? Like if I liked the format of Drive Time Radio, right? Like, people sharing today's news in a kind of weird way, very glossy. Here's some music to go along with it. Like, that doesn't really exist, right? Nobody's producing a podcast that has music on it per se. Or am I crazy?
Oh, not in full on songs like in that realm.
Yeah.
And forgive me as I'm not going to quote you very specific podcasts because that do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But actually, even just thinking back as to where podcasts came from with the daily source code,
Yeah.
to me, the daily source code was exactly what you're talking about. The vibe
Right.
that Adam Curry brought to that back in the day was very, very much that drive time radio vibe.
Yep.
The way that he approached his show, the way that he had the segments in there, the way that he brought people's voices in there, the way that he has jingles that came in there. In fact, even with no agenda, with the stuff that he's doing right now,
Yeah.
Still, it still has that vibe, which is long form, two people talking.
Yeah.
Lots of like the sound of the extra produced sound
Yeah.
of the audio, all of those things are still prevalent. That's just one aspect that has continued. And yes, there are a lot of other shows that do things like that as well,
Yeah.
where there's a longer conversation that's happening, 2-3 hours long for shows out there. And again, I'm not going to quote any at this moment because I don't listen to those chatty type shows, but I do know that they exist
Yeah.
and are there. I do like co-hosted shows more than anything else. That is my personal love in terms of the podcast genre. I'm not particularly a fan of interview shows.
Sure.
Just because I tend to connect with the podcasters themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I become really big fans of theirs. And I also do like longer shows, but not necessarily, I don't think I have anything currently in my list, which is around 3 or 2+ hours. Once in a while, they'll get to be that long.
Sure. Yeah, like, this tends to run long, and people will say all the time, like, oh, I listened to your podcast. I'm like, there's no way you had that much free time on your hands. Like, you can just tell me you listened to a small part of it, and I'll be okay. Okay, so, because that's one thing that I'm trying to connect now is because on one hand, we're in a world today where people just compete for attention across the board, period. Right.
Yep.
So, a podcast competition isn't necessarily another podcast, nor is it necessarily radio. On a lot of circumstances, the competition for attention for somebody listening to your podcast might be them playing their Xbox instead. So
Right.
it's a lot of it's not like podcast versus radio, which is in my brain sort of 20 years on, that's sort of still what I compared it to. Like the first time somebody told me what podcasting was, I was like, that's stupid. I have a radio. There's way more choice. I have to download everything in advance. I don't want to hear about this ever again.
Right.
So my sort of lizard brain still goes, oh, the competition for podcasts is radio, but the podcast competition is also Avengers movies. Like it's anything that somebody can go spend their time on, because that's the world we live in today. It's not pre-download it and listen to it. It's everything is available for you at a button push. So do you think that both attention starved as well as easy to satisfy world that we live in today, I'm trying to formulate this into a good question. I think I'm there. In 2005, 2006, there were a lot less ways to entertain yourself in the situation where you'd be listening to a podcast on the train, in your car. There's really not much mobile data. You didn't really have a mobile phone that can entertain you. Your choice really was drive time radio or podcast if you were in your car. Does that abundance of choice help or hurt the podcast ecosystem in 2024?
It's actually hurting it, I feel. I have sensed, not sensed, or like I've watched actual hard data from some of my podcasts and people that I work with independently, that their stats, if you will, the data of consumption for their podcast has drastically diminished. And other than the fact that the measurement shifted,
Yeah.
right? There are some things that changed within the podcast industry, data side of things, the technical parts of it that I'm not going to get into right now, where sort of like the measuring stick was changed to a different measuring stick, and therefore different numbers came up. But regardless of that, there also has been a drop in what I feel consumption for the older, more established podcasts that had been around for a while. And I do feel that it has something to do with that just infiltration of many different forms of media that are coming our way, and our capacity to be patient to get into things has really shortened, where we are looking for quick solutions to a problem, quick scans. Many people don't read full articles. Many people are still, they're pushing away from wanting to see anything that's like a video that's longer than 3 minutes. Like, oh my God, that's a long form video. If it's, you know what I mean? It just becomes so much more challenging. And even that, the way that we are teaching people to consume, let's say, new Netflix series, those ones that come from the streaming services, they're also trying to figure out, should we release them all at once? Should we do 2 episodes and then 2 episodes the next week? How do we do this kind of thing? And there's different types of releasing ways in which they're trying to get everybody to go to their platform to consume said content. And a lot of the time, folks are getting very unhappy about not having the full thing there drop and just binge the entire series. And there's like this, like, what do you mean I have to wait till next Thursday for another episode?
Yeah.
So it's a different type of consumption, I think, overall. And podcasting is just one level
Sure.
of that. Now, to follow up with that, though, that is where, again, the podcasting advocacy comes into the scene, which is teaching people when listening to podcasts is a good idea. So we have to spell that stuff out. let's say you are on the airplane and your eyes are incredibly tired and you don't have Wi-Fi and you're feeling a little anxious, that's a really wonderful time to put on a podcast and just have it be in your ears and you're able to kind of manage yourself. There's so many like self-help podcasts. You could put a comedy podcast on, something that's long form that'll take you out of your own brain, and you don't have to use your eyes to do that. You can regulate with your eyes closed and listen. For a mom, a new mom with little toddlers dawdling around, you can put a podcast on when you're at the library. The kid is doing their thing. You can just be sitting surrounded by screaming children in the library doing story time, and you can put on your headphones and listen to a podcast and keep an eye on your kid and still listen to grown-ups in your ears.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's opportunities for us to be in the world and find a use for the podcast versus these other forms of content, which actually require you to be like this, right? This is the engagement of most. And I'm for those of you who are listening, I'm grabbing my phone and I'm putting it right in front of my face at about 5 inches, 6 inches in front of my face. And the way in which my whole attention is moving into a machine is totally tuning you off the world around you. Whereas when you listen to a podcast, you can't tell. Most people can walk around, look at stuff, go shopping, and they're in the world while experiencing something with them. That, I think, is the difference between podcasting and almost anything else.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting jumping off point back to how you started. So walk me through a yoga podcast in a world where it wasn't video at all. Like in my mind, the video side of it really took off with whatever that was, 2006, like Dignation, when
Yeah.
it was like talking
Tiki
about
bar.
Tiki Bar TV, that was actually two guys on a couch sitting there
That is true.
drinking beer, talking about the day's news. But yoga is such a movement specific, on one hand breathing as well, but so much of me, if I'm like, oh, I'm going to go focus on yoga right now, my brain wouldn't be like, let me just do that with my ears. And at the same time, you've had gazillions, I believe that's the official measurement, of episodes downloaded of that show. So talk to me about an audio only yoga podcast in the early days of
Yeah.
podcasting. What was that like?
Yeah. So the reason that I did it wasn't necessarily because I was like, oh my God, you know what? I should do this. It was not that. It was I found podcasting and I thought, my goodness, I want to make a podcast myself. I want to test out this new medium. I want to use the tech. I want to do the thing. And I also don't want to work extra because I was teaching 13 public classes, yoga classes a week. I also had at that time, I also had another part-time job, which was waiting tables, of course, being a server. And so that was taking up a lot of my time. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be doing yet something else during that time because it's too much. So I thought, I want to use the tech. I want to learn how to record, how to put this together. What is this podcasting thing? Just do the thing. What am I doing all the time? Oh, I'm teaching yoga classes all the time. I'm just going to record those because I'm already doing it. So I'm not adding anything. So that's why it started. And the idea also dropped in because a lot of my students would say, I'm going on vacation. I wish I could take you with me. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting thought, And so I thought, okay, well, I recorded the episodes and I did the whole podcasting thing, submitting the RSS. Like I figured out all the tech part of it on my own as an experiment.
Yeah.
And then I would tell my students when they said, hey, I want to take you with me. And I would go, you can. With this podcast thing. And they would look at me like I was nuts. And I had to really explain exactly how to do all the things, which is fine. But the reason that I feel it also worked is exactly what I was telling you about before, because at first it started with students that were in my class. They were the ones that were downloading the episodes, and they knew me and had attended my classes before.
Sure.
And when I taught yoga, I don't teach yoga by demonstration unless absolutely necessary. I would walk around the classroom and I would verbally instruct the class with my mouth,
Yeah.
put your right foot forward and point it. Like I would verbally tell people what to do, not show people what to do. And so they were used to getting the audio or my voice to lead them into places, and I kind of transferred that into the audio yoga classes. Bonus was the fact that iTunes was relatively new at that time, and it had started to support podcasting. And I was one of the only yoga podcasts out there. There was another one prior, and that one did have video. And so he was even farther ahead of that. Chaz from Yoga Amazing. So he also was an inspiration in the sense that I saw the video and I thought, oh my gosh, he's doing this stuff in the audio. I can do this in audio. But my take is going to be that I'm recording my live yoga classes. Chaz was producing those classes based on 20-minute classes, 10-minute classes, things like that were like yoga for your shoulders, yoga for your lower back. I was just recording my live yoga classes.
This is Tuesday's yoga.
This is Tuesday's yoga class, 90-minute. And that's how I would name them. It was like a level 1 90-minute yoga class. And I would make a theme like, how to like, it wasn't even keyworded. Like it wasn't like dealing with anxiety, 90-minute class, the way that people teach them now.
Yeah.
I would say something like knowledge is bondage, 90-minute class. And you're like, what does that even mean? So that was the theme of the class. And I would thematically teach something a little more on the philosophical class versus the physical stuff.
Yep.
And people resonated with that.
So I would say it might not feel that way to you, but it does take a special kind of brain to look at something like, hey, I'm listening to a podcast and immediately jump to, oh, I would like to figure out the technology to do this myself. So what is it about, right? Like most people, realistically, when they listen to a podcast and they like it, they will go, I will listen to another podcast and then another one. Like I like listening to the radio, so I'll listen to more of it. Not, I like listening to the radio, let me go figure out how to be Howard Stern myself. So what is it about, you think, what you were going through in your brain that made you go, the next logical step here is me producing this myself, not me consuming more of it?
Yeah. That's awesome. I didn't think through that before. But okay, so here's the thing. The first podcast that came into my head were the NPR things, right? Because when I was downloading podcast into my iPod, there were a lot of public radio type shows with the fancy voices, very highly produced, beautiful shows, right? Those are the first ones that I put into my iPod, and I had that feeling of that's radio, that's not me.
Yep.
That's fancy, that's not me. And then I found the independent podcasters in there where they were all in between, right? So then I downloaded my co-host for the feed, the Official Libsyn podcast, Rob Walsh.
Yep.
His show, Podcast 411, was one of the very first shows that I downloaded. And as I was listening to that, I thought, oh my gosh, these are all regular people, because it was an interview show where he would interview podcasters and he would ask them what microphone they were using. He would talk about the computer they were using. And then they would go like, what's your show about? How do you do it? Like all the things, right? And I thought, oh my God, these people are doing this thing. I can do it. And the reason I said that is because I was also, at that time, I am a trained actor, so I had just graduated from grad school. So, and in doing that, I had moved to Los Angeles within that time. trying to work as an actor in Hollywood, which is a life-sucking thing. You have to be absolutely ready to have
Yeah.
everything
If you
sucked out of you.
want a real boost to your ego, go try and be an actor in Hollywood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That is what you need to do.
Yeah.
So I was getting to a point where the reason that I became an actor was to be on stage and to give life to characters and to really dive deep into these incredible works of art and to work off stage with people. Like, it was just a creative just expression all the time. And it was so fulfilling. And then when you're trying to do this in Hollywood, you don't get that. You don't get that. You have to go audition. You don't ever have to interact with anybody. You're looking at a camera. You can't move. You have to be like, you have to hit your line. You can't like embody anything. It's awkward and weird. And then even when you book a job, the person you're doing the entire scene with, sometimes they're not even there. It's somebody else standing. You have to look off the screen. It's blank. You have to act off of no one. I mean, it was really so creatively not fulfilling.
Yeah.
It sucked that I was also looking for an outlet. So when podcasting came in, it felt like this is something I can do that is creatively fulfilling, and I can do it myself and nobody can tell me no, because that's the other thing, right? Podcasting, anybody can do it. There's no gatekeepers. I don't have to tell people who I am. I don't have to pretend I'm Jennifer Lopez, which is what they wanted me to do all the time when I was doing the acting stuff. And it's like those kinds of things. So I think it was the right time and the right outlet that I was so wanting to creatively express myself that I did anything I could to do that, and thus dove into the technology as I did.
Got it. I still think, I mean, I still think that puts you in the point. Oh, like again, I would probably put myself in the same category, but you become blind to the fact. Like, also remember where the days we were in, the days of old, in the days of yore, right? So it wasn't sign up for Libsyn, go,
And
right? It was like figure out RSS feeds is not necessarily the right. Most people aren't going to be like, oh, I need a creative outlet. Let me go figure out RSS feed, right? Like that's
Okay. Hey, I'll take that. And also, so weirdly that you say that, because when I was trying to do the learning, because then I got obsessed. Then it was trying to figure out like, okay, what all this thing? And I listened to almost every podcast about podcasting. Anytime anybody was talking about podcasting, I was listening the whole time, right? I was just so in it. And there were books at that time that were about podcasting coming out. I bought all of them. I have all of them. But you know what the first book I bought was? You're not going to.
Don't say For Dummies.
It was For Dummies, but hold on. You have the wrong For Dummies, though.
Okay.
I got RSS For Dummies.
Wow. That's definitely
what I bought.
That is definitely the wrong book.
Yeah, that is the wrong book. And so the reason that I got that book is because that was the one thing I could not understand. So I got all of like, when people were talking about the podcast, I got the show, I got the microphone part, like I could understand the majority of all of the stuff, where I understood how to put a show together. Like there was so much happening at that time that it all clicked. And I knew that I had to work hard at figuring out how to use a microphone and stick it into the computer and all of the levels and all of that stuff. I got that.
Yeah.
But the RSS feed part of it was so above my head that I could not. And when they would go like, it stands for Real Simple Syndication. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. I don't know what that is either.
Right.
And so that's why I thought I have to know what that piece is, because the entire thing revolves around this RSS thing that I don't get. So I got the book and I read the book line by, I was like, okay. And what does that even mean? There was so much language in there that I did not understand.
Yeah.
But the more I was exposed to the concepts, the more it started to sink in, the more I was able to go, okay, I get this. Okay. So it's a delivery mechanism. I see. Okay. So but it took me to wrap my head around what that was took a bit. And I felt that was probably the biggest once I got what RSS was,
Yeah.
my brain exploded because I thought, oh my God, this is revolutionary. You know what I mean? It's like, what? This is so great. You can subscribe to it, and then,
Yeah.
so once you get it, you think everybody's going to get it. And everybody was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I know it's really confusing, but it's so cool.
Right. Well, it's like being, trying to act in Hollywood and being like, okay, so the next thing I need to learn is how satellite downlinks work for movie theaters.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like
You're like,
it's so far removed from the creative process.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you put yourself back in that headspace, did it seem like this is something you'd be doing 20 years later and that other people would be doing it would blow up? Or did it seem like something that was like, oh, this was cool for today and, it'll fade away?
I didn't foresee me working in the industry.
Mm.
Um, Even though I started working in the industry pretty early on, but I didn't foresee that continuing. I was very much more on the yoga side of things at that time. I was very much more invested in that as a way for me to develop professionally and to have that be the label that I chose to put on,
Yeah.
which was less about yoga teacher, more about, yoga therapist, somebody who was more in the wellness space. And I was going to use the podcasting end of it as a supplement to how to get my message out.
Sure.
And it slowly started to take over. And I think, in full transparency, the reason that happened was because I became a mom.
Hmm.
And in order for me to work in the wellness and yoga space specifically, I had to have very strong energy and not be tired, and to be there's a responsibility I feel as a teacher who deals with other people's bodies
Yep.
and their stuff, that I need to be like really centered and very strong in because I'm making people do things with their bodies that might potentially harm them. And injury, right, happens all the time when you're dealing with any kind of physical activity. And at that time, my kids were depleting every ounce of who I was, and I could barely think, let alone take care of anybody outside my house.
Yep.
And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to let that go, because this is very like I had to pour out so much energy into human beings and take care of them, that I thought, I'm just going to sit back and deal with the computer. The computer feels safe. I just
The
have to
computer
use my
does not
fingers.
grab my leg when it wants attention.
Yes, exactly. I can type, I can record, I can do spreadsheets. I learned a lot of things in terms of the online marketing space. Like I really dove into the skill set of social media, copywriting, production, like anything that was not putting me in front of people, and more behind the scenes, and also let me work when I could just come up for air.
Yep.
And so that's when it all started to shift, because then all of a sudden I had all of this other level of skill set that was outside of the other things, and it kind of took over. And but the yoga side of it, or the wellness side, the holistic side, always informs everything that I do, and I can sense it always coming back. Like it always boomerangs back into the work that I do, even within podcasting. Although at times it felt incredibly dissonant, now I'm finding finally a way to talk about it that is not that.
Hmm. Like what can you expand on that? What ways are you finding now that you didn't see a
I
path to before?
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that I use the moniker Yogeek a lot of the time, Yogeek, from the beginning, that was my online name, is because I was merging these two things that I felt didn't merge at all, the technology side of it and then the wellness side of it, or like the digital side and the embodied side, where it just didn't feel like they meshed. And so I created that moniker at that time, and that's what I used to use as my handle in a lot of different ways. And then I had a hard time sort of selling that because it was so, first of all, yoga when I started was not well known. It was very weird stuff to do. Even in the early aughts is when I was teaching. And that was not hip and cool at that time. It was very odd and weird. And then it became cool. And then podcasting, again, very odd and weird. And then mixing both those things was like, whoa, those people who were doing yoga in the early aughts were not podcasting,
Sure.
even though that was just not even happening. But now there's a lot of mixture in that, and I think as a person, as a middle-aged woman, I have learned so much, and I now know that there comes a point, I think, within the industry, especially as we're moving with a creator economy and people having to be on all the time. And even if you're just a young entrepreneur starting to get into yourself online, and even regular corporations out there, everybody's demand for visibility is there. There's a constant demand to be visible, to be creating content, to be pushing things out, to be writing stuff, to be on LinkedIn, to be on TikTok, and that is an extraordinary exhausting life.
Sure.
And you are in a constant state of having to create stuff. And so now when I work with people, or the folks that really gravitate towards me, is I just create a container for them to take a break. You don't have to continue to do this, but let's do the work of you turning inside, figuring out what really aligns. What is your next step based on what the life that you want to live, not just in terms of the income that you want to be making, and obviously being sustainable, having financial stability and reach and all those wonderful things that are going to feed you and your family, but also to see what is your capacity, how sustainable is this, when are you going to burn out, understanding that you cannot continue to keep moving at this pace.
Sure.
So that's where my work lies, in those transitional spaces when people are like, I'm so confused, I'm so tired, oh my God, I don't know what to do. That's when I come in.
Yeah.
And then you can come talk with me and I will create the container. I don't give answers.
Yeah.
I just ask the right questions. And then what tends to happen most of the time is people leave and they go, that was great, I am clear now, I know what next step to take.
Yep.
Solutions are not given, but there's a sense of ownership, agency. I know at least what my next step is.
Sure. Well, I mean, clarity is a huge part of
Oh, yeah.
anything you're doing, right? Is if it, what's the whatever version of the phrase, if you don't know where you're going, the worst thing that can happen is you get there.
Absolutely. Yep.
So in a world where, when you first started podcasting, like you said, it was, oh, I was one of the few yoga podcasts you could find on iTunes, and that's how I built an audience. Not so much today.
No.
That's the way you build an audience. How today, for those people that are being bombarded with what you're saying, right? All this external pressure to produce content. Well, somebody needs to consume the content, or you're going to feel extra wiped out. Says the guy with a show that nobody watches. How does one stand out in a world of thousands of people with the exact same ability to create, share, promote? How does somebody stand out today, and how does that compare to, what's the evolution of figuring out how to build an audience for a show, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I'm actually banking on thinking back to how I actually built my first, the yoga podcast, which it really became the foundation for the connection that I had with my students, with my real life students. So when I went into and created the very creatively titled Elsie's yoga class, I I when I did that, the core again, that my core audience was a almost I would say 20, 30, I don't know, maybe 40 students who maybe are still listening to those classes. And they were the core students that would show up to my online, no, excuse me, my regular real life classes. They would show up. They were the ones that if I said in the podcast, hey, I'm doing a special event at, Lululemon, which is I used to do stuff like that back in the day.
Yeah.
They would show up. They would
Mm.
show up to the stuff, and we would do the things. And I was so thankful to have those, 10 to 40 people who consistently showed up. I was making a great living off of that. It was bonus that other people from around the world got to listen to me. It was bonus that I have all of these downloads, over 4 million or almost I haven't looked at my stats in so long because I haven't done anything with that show since 2013. But like for 4 million downloads of those classes, that's like a lot. And I sort of disconnected from that of it all. And I just connected with the people who would go, your classes have been everything to me. I took you with me when we went to, when we got married and all that kind of stuff. So all that to say is that we are competing with a lot, but I think that if you go into to really serve a small amount of people, to really vision 20, not even 100, 20 people that your content is really reaching, and you can nurture that, you're going to get the bonus of the other stuff. But you have to build your business, your project, your vision around a smaller amount of people. Because what I feel has happened is that now when we connect or create stuff online, everybody's dream scenario is to go viral for the majority of the time, where there is value attached to millions and numbers that no longer mean really anything to me. I feel like it's a completely disconnected number.
Yeah.
And that's not real. Like that, you can't do that. You cannot replicate the virality that people are craving for everybody. And most people aren't going to stick around. Plus, I think this is a thing that a lot of people don't really understand. In order for you to manage scale that size, a lot has to happen.
Sure.
Because now you have a much greater responsibility with the content that you're putting out there than if you're reaching 20 people.
Sure.
So, and people haven't made that grown up under like decision in their heads or recognition that once you start reaching millions of people, the freedom that you have to say and do whatever the heck you want, it's not about censorship. It's about responsibility, because you are now part of the media, the media, and you can actually impact people in ways that you did not mean to.
Sure.
Well,
and part of it too is even the idea that like popularity is good, right?
Exactly.
There's some
Yes.
sort of,
yes.
it has to be a means to an end, right? Like
Mhm.
almost to your point, like if you have a message you want to share with the world, it's important that the world hears it. If you have a message you want to share with 20 people, it's important that those 20 people hear it. And if then the next version of that is that 100 people hear it, or 500 people hear it, or 2,500 people hear it, the best way to get to those 2,500 people isn't to also have 1.92 million people who aren't them
Yep.
also consuming your content, giving you feedback.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse to sort of expand your audience that way, especially when you start to, like, one thing that's challenging for entrepreneurs, and I imagine the same for podcasters, you can speak on that, is like your business's success becomes your identity, and
Yes.
you start to
Oh,
feel
yeah.
like however the business goes, that's a reflection on you. And I imagine in a world where you start going, oh, what makes me valuable is that 700,000 people listened to me last week. Well, what happens when they don't?
Mhm.
Right? And eventually they're going to not. One,
Mhm.
one way or the other, people are going to stop listening to you.
Mhm.
Um, is there like an identity challenge that happens between separating the creative side and who you are? I can imagine that's a problem for a lot of people.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I've actually been noodling on this idea. I haven't put out like I have this thing that I'm writing in my own head. I take a lot of dictation notes, whenever that idea pops into my head. I haven't quite sifted through all those ideas, but it is around right now the paradox that I feel almost daily because I'm a fiercely private person. I don't particularly thrive in sharing all things me or having access to me. And I also I like to be alone. I'm one of those folks that really enjoys having alone time for myself. I'm not a big, huge people person. I like one-on-one type of stuff. And recognizing that in order for growth to happen, whether I am um, being hired to do the work, let's say for Libsyn, or I'm doing work for myself that I truly believe in, that is my own and personal. I have to be visible. There's an element of visibility that needs, like, I have to be. And I've been noodling with the idea of the fact that we don't, and this is a kind of an interesting choice of idea, is the fact that we don't have consent anymore to be visible. We are demanded
Yeah.
to be visible. And so I'm fighting against the fact that I don't consent to this. I don't I want to show up when I want to show up, but I don't want to have my business only get clients when I create a video.
Right.
Right? I don't want to be forced, and it's not the fact that I don't wanna do the work of making videos and things like that. It's not that. It's actually my myself. Like, I don't want to be here giving this me to you. I don't feel like I should have to do that. I need to consent to do that.
Sure.
And I I don't I that's the part where I'm wrestling with that. I feel that if you're going to take my space, or we are going to share space, you are going to hear my voice, see my face, um, feel my vibe, that should, to me, that feels like a special thing. That
Y-
feels like that's a unique thing. I don't want to just give it out. And there's other times where I'm like, I just want to give it out,
Right.
And so, but I want to have the agency to do or not do, and to build a business not based around visibility. So
Sure.
I'm wrestling with those ideas because I don't want my identity wrapped into my success, my financial success. And right now, it feels like the more I show up, my, literally my face, the more it's directly connected to my financial success, and I don't like that. I don't like that at
Yeah.
all.
It's funny. It reminds me. So, like, I will not post pictures of my kids anywhere online.
Mhm.
And I heard somebody else talking about it, and I wish I could remember how. I wish I could remember who it was, because it was a really powerful analogy. But it was like, you and I are of an age where when we grew up, there was only family albums.
Yep.
There was no "let me send you a digital picture."
Mhm.
And when you walked in somebody's house, they weren't like, "Here's my family photo albums."
Right.
You had to earn it.
Yep.
Right? Like, maybe you sat with them on the couch for a while and you guys exchanged a lot of stories. And once you had earned some level of access, grandma or mom or whoever would look at you and say, "Stay right there. I'll be right back. And they go get
Yeah.
the album and,
Mm-hmm.
oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. But it was something that you had to earn access to. And hearing you talk about sharing yourself in that way, it just makes my brain go back to that same thing. Like, I'm sorry, you have to earn access to pictures of my kids.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just get that because it's Tuesday and you're on Instagram. Um,
Yeah.
but that's the world now, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just business. It's also, everybody going,
Yeah.
how come I can't see pictures of your kids? Like,
Right.
we played golf together once 4.5 years ago. Why can't I see your kid's face? Um, there's an expectation that everybody has access to that. So do you think the challenge for you is the fact that you don't want to give it, or is it the fact that people have an expectation that you should have to give it? Because I think those are like subtly different things. Like,
I think both. I think both. I think that there's also the other layer, which is your own makeup, meaning my own brain makeup, my own, just feelings. I mean, at a real basic level, we've talked about being introverted and extroverted. There's a lot of talk about neurodivergence around here. Everybody's brain, our recognition that how everybody's brains work differently, and if we give, let's say, somebody has some kind of diagnosis before they're going to go to school or whatever, and then they get a little list, hey, these are accommodations that you should be asking for this child, and we recognize that this child needs to have these accommodations in order for them to thrive. When we're working in the online space here, we're not taking those accommodations into the realm. And I'm taking it into that neurodivergence part of it because I recognize some of those things for me as a woman in my middle age. And I realize that there are some times when being on camera is not good for me.
hmm,
I need to learn in a different way. Right. I need to, if I'm doing some things, it has to be more internal. And I think that that's where, coming back to podcasting, a lot of the words a lot of the big thoughts, a lot of the way that I connect with people is not when you're looking at me. It's because I tune in and I connect with you. And it's weird when I'm closing my eyes and I'm really talking into the microphone. That just looks a little bizarro.
sure.
But when you're hearing it, it doesn't matter because you don't have to see me doing
Right.
all that stuff. You could just hear my voice and get that. But sometimes you have to tune in, and we can't just do that when we're pushing it all out. And there's some people who is the opposite. They need to have that camera in front of them so that they can really pop out.
Yeah.
But then when you see them in real life, that is gone. Like there's a disconnection there, and sort of an awkwardness that we all need to have because our brains all live differently, right?
Sure.
So I feel we need to make those accommodations and understand that. Well, what we're demanding of people is that everybody needs to be great with their voices and speak eloquently without any kind of likes and ums and whatever, vocal fry.
Yeah.
And we expect them to present in a way that is camera ready and, I don't know, beautiful and or not. And if they don't align with that, they get a bunch of flack for stuff like that. Because I have to say, in the online space, I don't know how many times somebody has said to you, hey, your lips are dry. Who's this guy think he is? Look at his hair, look at his t-shirt, look at the way, but women get all that all the time, where we just show up and they're like, why isn't she wearing more? Why doesn't she care more about the way she's showing up on camera? Look at her hair. It's so messed up. She needs to wear chapstick. I mean, and you sit there and you're going like, what does this have to do with anything?
I mean, to answer your question, no, I cannot relate because no, that does not happen to me because this is one of the many ways that it really sucks to be a woman
Yeah.
as it relates to being a man. Like there was a politician in Vancouver. I don't know if you know this story, who he tried to prove the point.
Mm.
He was running against against a woman. I can't remember if it was for mayor or parliament or something. He wore the same suit every day for 185 days. Nobody
Oh,
noticed. Nobody
yeah.
noticed. And whereas there was commentary on what she was wearing every third day.
Yeah.
And he, at the end of it, he said, "Just so you all know, all you media that have been following this race, you haven't commented once on the fact I've been wearing the same thing every day." And such is the world in which we live, for better or for worse.
Mhm.
But maybe that's a good pivot to let's talk about not just podcasting, but women in podcasting. I know that's important. I know underrepresented voices in podcasting is important to you. Obviously, the lack of intermediaries in podcasting, the fact that anybody can produce content is one of the things that uh, sort of levels the playing field, but it's still not really a level playing field. Why is it important to you, first of all, that there's more underrepresented voices are participating in podcasting?
I think that overall, one of the gifts that podcasting gave me when I first started was to open up my world. I was living in a very specific, well, obviously my own world, right? So I raised in El Salvador, an immigrated over to Los Angeles, California, grew up in a very staunch Latin American, El Salvadorian Catholic family. I was surrounded by Spanish speakers, right? All the time. That was my worldview, moving into my professional life and whatnot. And there comes a point when that worldview became very claustrophobic in some ways, like that there was no other, like, this is just what I'm going to do now. This is it. And when podcasting came into my life, hearing those voices, those independent voices, not even the NPRs of the world, but those independent voices out there who were talking about their world, just I didn't even know. Like, I didn't know who these people were, but I related with them, and they lived in different places, and they had other lives, and they were doing these other things that I'd never even heard of before. I was hearing people from Europe and Asia, and I just, all of a sudden, the world opened up. And I always say, like, those voices in my head saved my life, right? That's because that's my sort of story about podcasting. And I feel that voices that you often don't hear, literally the voice, not even humans speaking, like, how sometimes you voice and is different, but the actual sound of people's voices in your ears, when you are not exposed to accents, to ways of thinking, to vocabulary terms, to all of those things, you don't see where they line up. And what I saw was, wow, I'm having a really hard time understanding what this person is doing, but I do know that they're talking about when their mother passed away, and I can relate to that.
Right.
And so there's a bridge, and there's more of understanding. Oh yeah, they're going through this in, insert country I've never visited before. It's the same as what I'm going through over here. I had no idea. So that just allows for that connection. And thus you can be more open and accepting and knowing things that connects us all, if you want to think about it from that perspective. And it's unfortunate that the exposure, again, going back to what people think a podcast is, and in my thing about the Avengers, is just that if you think that the world is just Avengers, you're going to kind of feel a little, either I want to be an Avenger and that's all you can ever be, and judge everything that's not an Avenger in a way that is totally not okay. It's not even the right, it's not even on the right thing to measure with, right?
Sure.
So in talking about it around the issues is that right now, and even within podcasting, the more popular shows are still driven by white men. And there's no, like, there's no fight in that. And also, yeah, there's call her daddy. I get that. But it's one person.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like sometimes you're like, but we have that one.
Yeah.
And also, there are no people of color right now at all that are making the kind of money and the kinds of deals that are being put out. I'm not saying they should. Here's the other thing, too, though. I don't believe that they should, or that you have to just have everybody represented in the multi-million-dollar deals, because now we're really addressing leadership. Now we're leading, we're talking about those people in the room that have all that cash, who all are the same,
Right.
and they want to invest in the things that they want to invest in. So it's not surprising.
Sure.
So in that respect, that's a different conversation. But I feel that in terms of featuring articles being written, exposure to shows that are being put out, coverage, again, with the podcasting advocacy, whenever I'm asked about podcasts, always having at least one show in the back of my mind that isn't that one. And I make, I think for me, in terms of anytime that I get a chance to speak of it, it's like I don't want to continue to bring light to or showing into those shows that everybody talks about, because their shows are in everybody's mouth. That I cannot have them in mine.
Right.
That I don't need to speak in them, because it's, at least I can do that. But all that to say, having that diversity of thought, diversity of language, diversity of voice, diversity of so many different aspects, because it's not just about race or gender. It's about so many different, it's geography is huge. Being able to hear outside of the people on the coasts,
Yeah.
right? Outside of those hubs where all of the podcasts are. That's just so important as well.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Now, is that, I mean, there's, we could list a contributing factor one at a time for the next 7 hours.
Right.
But in, like, on one hand, some of it I still think has to be an audience problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we're talking about popularity of content, which on one hand is like what's being produced, on the other hand is what's being consumed.
Mm-hmm.
And, realistically, I think some of the problem is that a lot of people consuming podcasts today would like to hear from white males.
Right.
If in white males based in California or New York or whatever those demos are, because realistically, there's almost 8 billion people on Earth now. That's the podcast surface area is probably less than 2% of that, if not even smaller. So the percentage of people around the globe that listen to a podcast today is probably infinitesimally small in the grand scheme of things. And so, well, who are listening to podcasts? Almost by definition, it's people with better access to technology than people with worse access to technology. You can sort of go down the list of like the privilege of having access to a podcast for a lot of people. Again, in the global scheme, not just the podcast scheme. It makes sense to me a little bit that today podcast metrics, whatever that looks like, are not probably going to look super different than broadcast television, because broadcast television in the Western English speaking world. But that's got to be changing every day, right? Like every day, the audience needs to be diversifying away from that today, just because there's probably a saturation point of like everybody in North America with an iPhone who's going to listen to podcasts probably already is. So the growth can't be coming from there. Do you see it that way? Is some percentage of it people who have access to the platform is dictating what's popular, or do you think I'm misreading it?
No, I think that there's a level to that, and there's also a sense of something that I've been noodling with, and I've spoken about too, is that there's a lot of legacy podcasts now, right? The ones that everybody says, the ones that have been on the top 10 for decades.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, it's sort of like if people, like I was 35 when I started Elsie's yoga class. Those students that were in my class at that time, there were some of them that were in their 50s, some of them were in their 40s. There were a few younger folks too, of course, in their 20s and whatnot. But some of those folks that used to do yoga with me now are probably aged out of doing yoga now. And in the same way they were doing it at that time.
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening with a lot of these legacy podcasts, that audience is aging out of the audience.
Yeah.
And what's not happening that I see is that the growth of the audience size, the younger generations fueling into those legacy podcasts is less so because of what we spoke about before, because their fragmentation of the array of media they can consume.
Yeah.
And thus, that they're going to start to drop on the older end and not gain as much on the back end. And so the core audience is going to drop. The overall, the numbers, I believe, sorry to say this, podcasting industry is also going to drop.
Yeah.
And there might be a point where it will rise up, but it's going to be a multifaceted audience, meaning it's not just going to be the podcasters that are, the audience that's listening via RSS feed, but it's also going to be the audience that is subscribed to their TikTok account. And it's also going to be the audience that's watching their YouTube long form videos. Some of those audience members will overlap. We're always going to have those super fans, but sometimes it's going to be completely different. The people who are watching Elsie's yoga class on YouTube are different than the ones that listen, that are completely different than the ones that are going to catch my 2-minute yoga meditation on TikTok, right? Totally different. Maybe they can intertwine, but not all the time. And so that audience will continue to rise. But the ones that are just sticking to the one thing, that's not going to continue to rise in my book. And all that to say that those voices, in terms of there is a level of privilege of the ones that have been listening before because of the podcast of it all, especially the younger audiences. I know that I have one of my mentees who works with high school students. And for many years, Apple Podcasts was the number one way people got podcasts. That's like, it's the one that's your biggest, according to many years worth of data. And then Spotify started to come into the scene, and then YouTube started to come into the scene. And all this to say that in high schools, some of these podcasts, some of these devices, first of all, they don't have they don't have iPhones, they have Android devices. And the second thing is that there are some things that are not accessible, meaning in some school situations, some apps are inaccessible at school situations. So if you are teaching a class about podcasting, if you are encouraging students to listen to a podcast, sometimes the only thing that they can use is YouTube. They have access to YouTube.
Yep.
Or they have access to Spotify. They don't have access to Apple Podcasts because that, again, not everybody has an iPhone. Mind you, now they do have a web interface and all that fun stuff so that it is for more people. But
realistically, what you're trying to say is the iTunes store, okay, boomer.
Yeah,
right?
That's kind of what I'm saying. Yes. Yeah. And there is room for it. And I'm a huge Apple fangirl. I am all in on all things Apple. And I think that there has been a point of my brain where I'm just going all in, and I was tunnel visioned in the sense that this is the way to go. And in the past year or so, I've started to really open up because, again, podcasting advocate. I'm not here to be a podcasting dictator. I'm not here to dictate how you should consume podcasts and where you need to do it. And this is the optimal way. And there's nothing other than this. To understand that in order for a medium to expand and survive and thrive, we have to meet them where these people, especially the younger generations, are coming into it, right?
Yeah.
Even my mom is sharing bits of podcasts to me via Instagram, right? And
sure.
She's in her 80s, or I don't even know. Sorry, Mom, I don't want to age you, but I think so, mid-70s. But yeah, she's older.
Right. Well, and at some point, that's got to be the dividing line as well, right? Is like the Venn diagram of people who watch a ton of TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, and against the Venn diagram of people that would like to listen to a 90-minute podcast episode.
Right.
There can't be that much crossover between them. Even if there were originally, the more you start consuming the short form content, the more that's what you want. And the more you start consuming the long form content, the more that's what you want. So that audience that sort of, TikTok already won by getting them, as kids or young teens, or it's going to, now, not to say that therefore all podcasting is defined by it being long form. To your point, maybe that you have to go, okay, I have the long form content, but I'm going to clip it up into 2-minute clips to get the message to the people that only want 2-minute clips.
Yep.
But that's an adjustment around, hey, the best part of this thing is I can just do whatever I want and the audience will find me. That's different in a world that, like, as you said, now we sort of have to meet them where they are. Because that audience that's just going to find you, A, has a gazillion other things to find, as we mentioned. There's a discovery problem, but B, they're going to stop consuming it for one reason or another.
Yep.
So that's a bit of one of my questions for you that we didn't get to was going to be, what does podcasting look like 10 years from now? That's a bit of a tip of the spear for that, probably, is that, like, my answer is always, I have no idea what it's going to look like, but I know it's not going to look like this.
Right.
Like, it's not going to be static. How do you see the podcast ecosystem sphere, whatever you want to think of the whole thing as, needing to evolve to meet that sort of newer generation of listener where they are?
I think it already is doing it. I think that there's a lot doing it. I think the people that are pivoting quickly, not quickly, I can't say quickly, no, not quickly, but starting to, is the recognition of the whole platform sale. Like, because the people who are making money off of podcast are the ones that are going to be like, how do I make up for the lack of money here to include the possibilities of making money off of somebody, right? So it does start to include the entire footprint of somebody's online space. And every part of it is going to be sold differently and or being packaged more. So that's sort of how I view a lot of it. And there might be prime intrastate. What do you call that word? It totally escaped me. But anyway, the prime money is coming from, back in the day when you were getting those banner ads on websites, you paid more money for those banner ads versus like on the sidebar, stuff like that. So if you want them on the show versus in the newsletter versus TikToks or videos and things like that, all of those things are different, I think, points of sales. And it also, I feel there's going to be an understanding of the diversification of that audience. So a podcaster can say let's say I'm 50-50 demographic of all genders or whatever it is, very much equally distributed overall, but my podcasting audience is 70% women.
Right.
Right. So then if you want to have that reach, you need to really do the podcast.
Sure.
Because once I get to the TikTok of it all, maybe that skews a little different. So you get an opportunity to do that data, that the packaging of your own stuff, you have to figure out how all that layers in. So I see that in my dream wish scenario. I really feel that RSS as a distribution will stand the test of time. I think it's going to, my hope is that there's more understanding of what it actually is. Because again, it's kind of hard to describe. But if we can have apps that can become aggregates for how you want to consume content, this is what I want, and I wish I could predict it and just say this is the way it's going to be. But I want apps like this to be the way that we control how we consume content. There are some apps right now that have been released. I can't remember that one of the ones that it just came across that is really banking on that, meaning it's really almost an app where you aggregate, the people that you really love on Threads, your newsletters, YouTube channels, an Instagram, whatever, and your podcast all in one place so that you can come in there and go, oh, this is my daily consumption. I found another app called Unwatched via podcast, of course, because that's how I find out all the stuff. And Unwatched is sort of like an intermediary type app that allows me to be sucked out of the YouTube algorithm. So I can just pull in all my subscriptions into Unwatched. I can also send certain YouTube videos to Unwatched, and it's queued up. So I have an inbox, kind of like an email inbox, and then I can go, oh, nope. I can make them go away, the ones I'm not going to watch, and then I will just send the ones that I do want to watch to my queue. And then I open up Unwatched when I'm ready to watch YouTube, and I just see my queue. I don't see algorithms. YouTube doesn't get my information. It strips off the ads. So I'm not interrupted, especially with the longer form content. To me, that is so empowering. I cannot tell you how amazing it is to have that there, because every time I open YouTube, I end up down some weird rabbit hole, or else my feed, my For You page becomes this weird stuff. I'm like, I just watched one video about how to make t-shirts. I don't need to become a t-shirt, entrepreneur.
I mean, so I used to, now I understand you made your initial investment in your RSS for Dummies book. So you need to, you need to justify that. I would say I have high hopes for the podcast standard of RSS staying around for the long haul. I feel like it's already dead from a can this be where everything is all consumed from standpoint? Just because that's how I used to get all my news.
Yeah, well, I still do, but I think it's
I just had to load my RSS client. It's been so long, I haven't even gone there, and I looked, and of the maybe 60 sites that I used to have as my daily, this is what I want to know from, more than half stopped publishing an RSS feed. Like more than half are just broken now. And I think it's what you said, which you said the quiet part out loud, which was and I don't get to see the ads.
Yeah.
But that's why they all got rid of it, right? Was that, the model for publishing changed, where it's less about publishing good content. It's more about making sure people see enough ads. And I think that's got to be the balance for that sort of disintermediation for the content, is that it's nice to be able to watch your YouTube queue without ads, except that then we turn into the benevolent YouTube bandwidth distribution foundation, just serves people's videos forever for free, isn't really a model that works. Now, that's not to say that you can't fix it with subscriptions or some other economic model, but in a world where the ads pay for everything, it's challenging to get rid of the ads but still have everything else.
Right.
So I don't know. Like, as soon as you were saying that, I was like, I actually need to look at my RSS feed, because I remember I had to stop using it because I stopped getting updates, and even now I don't.
Yeah, I still do. I still use my RSS feed reader. It's how I get the majority of the stuff, and I still grab. And I think what it is that the readers now support places that don't have RSS feeds or have new ones. And so I will find them within the app itself. Like if I want to follow, I don't know, whatever it is, whatever website, you can still put the website in there and it'll pop up what you can subscribe to from that website, whatever it is. But I think that so what I'm fighting here is less about the ads, because I actually, when the ads work, meaning when the ads really hit, they are so great. That's one of the only reasons that I go into Facebook. Is because I love the ads they serve me, because they know me so well. So I don't care about the people. I'm just looking at the ads. I'm like, what's this shirt? Oh, this I need. They know me so well that that's kind of how I shop, is going to the Facebook, because they know which ads to serve me. So that's not to disparage that. I think what I'm fighting the most is the algorithms.
Sure.
I don't like other people telling me what I should and not be watching. And that's what's so disheartening about Instagram, because I that was my platform of choice ever since it started. And now it's so hard because I see, of the people that I follow, the first 3 posts, if I'm looking at my feed, are from people that I follow. The rest of them are suggested. Yeah. And I have to go in there and go like, don't give me suggested. Don't, every single time. Yeah. And I get so tired of that.
Right. Well, again, though, I mean, it's an economics problem, right? Which is we're back to the benevolent Instagram bandwidth foundation will just serve you all your friends' photos for free forever without ever trying to show you one that makes them money. It's just not gonna. It can't. Ad supported or paid, but paid promotion is the same as ad supported, right? Like it's in my mind, it's a distinction without a difference, which is like, if that's where so I get to put on my like CDN hat for once, and to be like, okay, so I know what it costs Instagram to serve all of the things you want to see,
right?
And then I know what you pay them,
right? And
there is a gap. Right? There's a gap between I pay you nothing and it costs me $8 billion a year in infrastructure.
Right.
And so on one hand, while I don't agree that I enjoy the algorithm, I understand why the algorithm needs to be there. And it's so that you can keep seeing the stuff you do want to see without paying to see the stuff you don't want to see.
Right.
Or you do want to see, rather. And I don't know that there's a solution. Like people watching a YouTube feed in their own client is totally fine as long as it's 1% of the audience or less than 1% of the audience. Right. And I imagine it's even less than that because it makes no real economic impact on YouTube. Therefore, they're happy to do it because other people are now subsidizing you watching it ad free. And that's the problem, though, is once it jumps the threshold, right, which happens from time to time, where you see platforms start banning other viewers and things like that. But like, it's just an economics problem in my mind. Like, I don't even think of it as like the algorithm or a social media problem or whatever. It's just like, there are costs that need to be paid. The algorithm is today the best way to cover those costs for the people providing the service. If there was a better way, they would probably choose to do that. Again, as an economics problem, I don't think they would choose a substandard way to make money for some sort of moral, social, political point. But it is to say that those things evolve over time. And, the algorithm that works today might not be the one that makes sense 2 years from now. And it might be the one that serves you exactly what you want, just like Facebook. And you go, oh my God, I can't wait for my next thing the algorithm is going to deliver me.
Right. And I mean, but also it's like, I am absolutely understand that. In fact, and I also really like the ads for Instagram, by the way. I'm just saying, I really like those ads.
Which is the core. Like, people all the time are like, oh, people hate being sold. I'm like, people love being sold.
People love being, especially when I'm looking for that one thing. I love it for you to figure it out for me because anyway, for all of that stuff, I love it.
Yeah, people don't like being sold stuff they don't want.
Right.
But like every time I've ever tried to give somebody a restaurant recommendation, they want to hear all about it.
Yes.
Tell me more.
Tell me more. And this is why there are some parts of those algorithms that I'm absolutely for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that the unfortunate part is that when you're dealing with, and this is going to take us to a completely different way, and I don't want to go there, but it's that we are, again, if you are serving an algorithm to a brain that's not developed to be able to handle and understand that they are being manipulated, because under it all, at least I recognize that I'm being manipulated. And that part of what's happening here is that I'm giving information and it's giving me something else. And sometimes I end up down rabbit holes that I didn't even know I'm in. And I know what's happening with me.
Yes.
But there's smaller brains or less developed brains that are coming into this that are being manipulated into all kinds of things, whether it is through shopping stuff, whether it's ideology they're not ready to understand. Because how can you understand certain types of philosophy from a nuanced perspective? That's what we're looking for in this world right now, a nuanced conversation about issues, about the world itself, about so many things. But we are being taught to be this or that. That's
Yes.
it. Nobody teaches nuance. And if you even do the nuance, then you are label, whatever that label might be, whatever it is, right? And thus, when we start to just create a society that wants this or that, and we teach that every single day, and you go into these algorithms and it just reinforces that because of the way that economics, right? Everybody's thumbnails are going to be the same because that's how you get more views and that's how you make more money. And they are all really like in your face and like showing things horribly. Headlines, that's the way you get those clicks. That's the economics. And so we're not talking about nuance. If I'm sitting here going like, let's talk about the nuance of whether or not podcasting is going to be you can have the title being like, Elsie said podcasting is dying in 5 years.
Podcast already dead? Question mark?
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Yes.
So that's it. And that is total. And most people are just going to be like, oh, I'm not going to listen to that because, and they'll share or whatever. But if we really work off of that, we're not. The algorithm isn't going, they want that. And that's the part that I'm just like, again, I want the agency to opt out. And there's times when you're forced into it and you're sitting here going like, how can I be the most divisive?
Right.
How can I have the thing that's going to make people pause? And again, as a marketer that I've fallen to be, not by choice, but because I do love it. I think I see it in so many different ways of how to reach the right audience is like such a dream scenario to be able to speak to an audience. I think it's amazing to be able to sell to to be able to give them what they need to make their life better. That's the like dream scenario of being a marketer. But the other part is when we're being asked to like, no, we just need to get the clicks. Like what's going to work? And then you're sitting there going like blue, yellow, green, happy face, teeth, angry face, fire. Okay, let's go with that. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's manipulation. There's no meaning to this.
Yeah, and it's a world where you don't need to read the newspaper front to back anymore.
No.
Right? So
No.
it's like, if you liked this article, jump to page 11 and read article 2 on that page. And it's like, well, it's because there was 10 different opinions on the subject the first 10 pages that you're now not going to listen to.
Yeah. Totally.
So the algorithm, obviously that's technology as a depending on your perspective, technology that's a net win or a net loss. Not to date, I don't want to date anything too much, but one thing that struck me, I was at Podcast Movement in DC for a day. There is a lot of, I don't even know the right word, FUD around AI that I heard. It was everything from like, this is great, to there's a moral problem with AI and everything in between. And I can't help but think it's fundamentally the same conversation as the algorithm. How do you see AI today in podcasting, and where is it going to take us?
Yeah, I think that AI has solved a lot of those really heavy problems that I actually didn't even think they could be solved. I remember a lot of these companies that now are AI companies. I didn't know at the time. I would meet with them because a lot of people like to meet with me and pick my brain about whatever new product is coming up. That's something that I really love to do, by the way.
Yes.
And so when they would pick my brain, I'm like, you know what? I love this product. I think it's amazing. I would want it to do this, 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 and this. And then my dream scenario seemed so like not something that could happen. Like I didn't even think it was possible. And AI made it possible. All of a sudden I was like, oh, it did it. So what are those things to me? Research, being able to like pull like the stuff that people are doing now when it comes to long form content like this, stick it into something like opus.ai, and like it spits out these, whatever the algorithm is of the best tidbits, like it cuts down, like those things are huge, heavy lists for somebody who's trying to pull those clips out of stuff. At least
Sure.
that's step one. Even if they're the wrong clips, you still have the ability to do them much faster with transcription and all kinds of stuff. So that to me is so great in terms of repurposing. I love it for research purposes, pulling in, like, let's say my podcast, the feed. We've been at 10 years. It would be amazing to be able to pull the RSS feed in there, get a whole slew of information out of there. How many times did Rob mention blah, blah? When did we cover monetization? And have it spit out these answers. I think I think that exists. I haven't invested in that type of product, but I know that exists. So in that respect, I think it's a wonderful tool for work, right? And quick show notes. Easy production, like Squadcast has some amazing AI features in terms of audio stuff that really works wonderful. I mean, there's like all of these things that really cut down. I think that's fantastic. I feel that I'm not sure about the AI voice of it all. I'm not sure how I feel about the I don't know, the overdub things that I've seen out there. I like it because I have, there's been times when I've said the wrong word and I wish I could just go in there and say the right word.
Yeah.
Where it's been weird. Like I've had to do a full edit on something when I legitimately just said the wrong word. My brain went boop, that's great. I wish I could just highlight, change, boom. Right. But I could see how it could be problematic in that respect. And the fakes are the ones that are really concerning to me. That's the part that is really concerning. Outside of that, I think the art form of audio production, of both video and audio, nothing is a solve for that.
Right.
Without the skilled person touching it all.
Sure.
That to me is still that you're not going to be able to find that. That's going to be premium for anybody who's going to be the visionary of a lot of these tools and the overseer of all of that. That's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
But the oversight of AI tools, I think, what is it? What was I just seeing right now? Oh, I just saw an article on AI being used at schools.
Yep.
By children, by the kids, right? But they're not doing it in the way that you think that they were doing it. They're actually using it. Sometimes they're using it to support their work, right? But a lot of the time they're doing it for fun and for asking questions and jokes and things like that.
Yeah.
But the key component that really called my attention was that these schools don't have a protocol for using AI. And like they don't have a thing, like they don't have a stain, like they don't have a you can use AI for, you know what I mean? They don't have that. And neither do companies. Like nobody does. No, I mean, seriously, if you just, insert whatever company, I don't think that they have that. And I'm going to name one just because they're big. And if they don't, how do you expect the smaller ones? But let's say Spotify. Let's say like you go into the Spotify of it all and you are hired and you are onboarded. Would you get in your employee manual a straight up how we use AI in this company?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you stop and or not that? Because then there's that, right? Where it's like, you're not supposed to use ChatGPT. You can only use internal, whatever, the Microsoft component of it here.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. You can only use this one or however. How would they know if you are on your own at home doing some quick grammar checks and
sure.
What's going to happen? Are they going to fire you? How do they know?
So it strikes me that a lot of the stuff around it is because it's early.
Yeah.
And I think back, so I want to narrow in on the podcast specifically, because you use some of the same words that I heard people using at Movement. And it struck me as there seems to be implicit things happening, but that we're not talking about. So even the premise that like, an AI voice, or an AI edit or something might need to be, like I heard people talking about disclosure.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like most media already has to include the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Like, I don't remember Seinfeld having to put a tagline as like, we actually didn't shoot this all in a row, and this isn't actually one 30-minute clip. We actually took multiple scenes and we cut them together. And actually, sometimes the actors screwed up their lines, so we shot it again, and then we edited it, and then we leveled the audio. Like, or hey, this album was recorded using Pro Tools. There was actually a kick drum used that no musician played. Uh, no, there's no disclosure required in Star Wars to let you know that actually this was CGI. And in fact, we were not in outer space shooting this movie. And those were not, no droids were harmed. Um, like there's already this implicit, hey, there was a lot of technology and stuff, and this is all a lie, right? If you're watching the Avengers movie, just so you know, this is all a lie,
Hmm.
all a lie.
Right.
What is it about podcasting specifically right now in this moment that's making people go, no, 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 this isn't a lie. Oh no, like it would be crazy if this content didn't come from a human, or we edited this clip, or we recorded this twice. Is there something about the format specifically?
I think it's the voice of it all, in true honesty. I think the voice is going back to the voices in my head saved my life. The connection to the voice in my body, to me, feels inherently real and inherently trustworthy. When I'm speaking with somebody, there's something about listening and the vocal, like there's something different.
Yeah,
Whereas when I'm watching a movie, there is a suspended reality, like you're mentioning.
yeah,
I kind of I will go into something like Avatar and go, wow, right? But there's nothing about it that I'm going to go, that's so real.
right.
That's true. Oh my God, right?
Yeah,
And so I see that. I see that. And even when I see films that have been shot like in one take, or there's a very specific take that makes it really real and raw, there is an understanding. You feel it and go, wow, that looks very real. That struck like that. Oh,
hmm,
right. So even if there was some stuff that was not real, there is enough reality within the way that it's being placed that you can sense that.
yeah,
Whereas with podcasting, it's all real. I mean, up to this point, it has been all real. You hear people's mouth noises, people like, get away from the microphone and then you're like, oh my God, get closer to the mic. You could hear stuff like that. You know that these people are moving. You can hit
yeah,
mic. So there's all of these things that are happening. And so it feels a little disconcerting to not have that in my ears. Like if I'm seeing a robot talk to me, I see it's a robot talking to me
right.
like a human, but I know it's a robot. Um, I mean, I would assume AI is getting so much better, obviously,
Yeah,
but there is a sense with the audio component that that's the part that I'm not sure. And I think as a human being yesterday, was it yesterday? I can't remember what day it was that I was listening to. Oh, somebody left a voice message. It was one of those robot calls kind of a thing. And somebody left a voice message and I started to listen and I was like, this robot sounds like a human. And there was a point where I thought, is this a human that actually sounds like a robot? Or is this a robot that sounds like a human? Am I going to have to vet if I'm speaking so there was all kinds of things that happened in my head at that moment
yeah,
where I thought I can't trust my own understanding. And am I going to be labeling everybody that sounds like this as a robot when they're really actually people?
right.
That's the part where I think we're at the beginning, to your point, that
Yeah,
it's just the beginning of this. And the disclosure of it, I just want to pitch you on a guest that you need to have on your show, who is also
yes.
an OG, Christopher S. Penn,
Okay.
from Marketing Over Coffee from back in the day. He's still using that, but he has another podcast. It really just centers on AI,
Yep.
and he's really gone all in on AI. And I think that conversation would be amazing. He is a brilliant brilliant person to talk to about all this stuff. And he is a huge fan and proponent of disclosure to the extra. So that would be a great conversation for you to check out, because even in his email newsletter, he will disclose everything. Like he's one of those marketers that'll straight up go, I'm going to sell you now, blah, blah, blah. Right. Or this is he discloses, or if you want to, he has a big giant chunk that says, if you want to unsubscribe here, click this button, like that big in the top of the newsletter. So he's sort of amazing data marketer, by the way. He can give you all the information in terms of that.
You're one step ahead of me, because we were doing one way we were going to do guests this season was having people do the ice bucket challenge and call somebody out. So there you go.
Really?
So now I know who I got to go after next.
Yeah, you got to go reach out to Christopher Espan. And plus again, OG, old school. He's seen so much, and he has his hands on all of the AI stuff. Brilliant, up to date, super on it, has the data to back it up.
Yeah.
I was so good.
As you were talking there, I found myself nodding along. And I think in my brain, what I connected is there is something about the medium today that is that expectation. And the way I think about it is like when I buy I'm thinking date myself, when I buy an album, when I stream a song, my expectation is that that's not a one take vocal. And there might be 4 overdubs on it. And no, that's not one guitar. That might even be 4 session players playing along with. But when I go see them live,
right,
I get so sad when there's a backing track, or when I can hear the auto tune, or so it is the difference between like, I accept it here. Like I do not take offense that you have produced your music.
Yes.
But I do take offense that you are not playing your music.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I think there's something there to podcasting where the expectation is that it's very meant to be live and not produced.
And it's not that it's not produced, because the production process all happens, right?
Yeah.
But it's the fact that it's the non-human. It's the non-human part of it, which is the hard part. That's the part. Because I think in terms of production, I do feel that there's some algorithms, and I'm sure they're going to get even better in terms of the tool sets that are going to be very, like, you're going to be able to mold it so that it is the optimal production process in certain ways.
Sure.
But in terms of the humanity of it, that's the part where I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I could also see, what if I want to create a project that is like a project that would cost me in the 5 figures, upper 5 figures, in order for me to produce a 10 series something or other with a producer, voice actors, blah, 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 blah. I don't have that kind of money. I can invest in a tool that can generate these voices, and I can create my 10 episode series of this narrative podcast all through AI, and I could do it. I mean, that's interesting to me.
Yeah, I guess part of it is like the distinction between production and production, right? Like it's like, realistically, just because the band is playing live doesn't mean the soundboard isn't adding a chorus and a reverb and an echo and trying to make it sound exactly the way they want it to sound.
Right.
Right? It is not you're not getting the raw output of an electric guitar with no amplifier on it when you're at a show. So there is ignoring the fact that it's real time, which I think may or may not be germane, but ignoring the fact that it's real time, it's a produced sound of humans playing on stage. Is very different than a produced sound of a backing track. There's no piano player on stage at the moment. Here's, cue piano, and here's a click track for the drummer, and here we go. Versus, of course, nobody in the band plays piano, and there's piano on their album. Clearly, somebody who wasn't them was playing piano. Okay, I'm okay with that. There's piano on the song. That's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, but I still think that's just expectation or assumption, even, right? Is like, I assume that a live band is going to play live music, and I assume today that there is no third AI voice on a podcast. But I just think, at some point, filmmakers were saying, if you're using CGI, you're not a real filmmaker. And at some point, musicians were saying, if you're not recording to analog, if you're using Pro Tools, you're cheating and you're not a real band. And then you fast forward to 2024 and like, what do you mean you didn't use Pro Tools? It's not even possible. There's no studio you could record in analog.
Yeah.
So like the passage of time, I think, deals with a lot of the stigma around certain things, but there's something about AI that's different it's a different kind of tool. And on one hand, it's really not different than autotune.
Right.
But on the other hand, it seems very different than autotune in terms of what it can do.
Yep.
So
agreed.
As much as I hate to end on AI, I feel like that's a great place to leave it. So the ice bucket challenge you nailed already. So I'm not gonna ask you for the ice bucket challenge.
Okay.
Before we go, you sort of we talked about it in the longer term, but do you have what's a soundbite version of where are we going to be in podcasting in the year 2029?
I think podcasting has a way of reaching the right people, tapping into the right innovators, into the folks who are rebels, into the people who want to do things their way, into the ones that have their pulse on what's coming. And they inherently will recreate the medium to be reflective of that, whether or not the media itself, the legacy models, if you will, ride that same boat is different, right? But those innovators will always be there in terms of podcasting. There is a sense of like we wear the podcaster moniker as a sign of I do things my way. And I think that spirit is still going to, it'll stay there. There's going to be that same kind of rebel nature in podcasting that will stay.
Awesome. Elsie Escobar, thank you so much. This was an amazing chat for me. I hope I didn't annoy you too much.
Oh, come on.
And I would leave it with just, I am my filler words. So AI, do not dare touch my, who I am, because I am nothing if not my filler words.
Oh yeah, baby, filler words.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Elsie. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Another round, so much more to talk about. Gonna aim to satisfy with help from CacheFly. Get to it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast. The Anycast podcast, brought to you by CacheFly.